want you to know that our work to Pan-Africanism is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is displayed on this page. And our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by me, Ajamu Umi, and Shakura Umi, my biological, ideological daughter. And it goes without saying, both of us are active organizers within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So to get us starting on our topic for this week, Pan-Africanism, climate change, and gender, I turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. I appreciate you, sir. Greetings, everyone. So, we are so proud to continue to have this conversation. If you were able to join us earlier this year for the Pan-African Women's Day institution holiday that we celebrate as an organization, then you were present for the same topic to be discussed. And we wanted to continue the conversation because we don't think that, just having this conversation once is enough. And we also understand that just like propaganda, we have a responsibility to reinforce information, just like you are being reinforced when you hear the same commercial for McDonald's or you see the same commercial for Target, right? Like propaganda is doing a great job. Imperialism is doing a great job. Capitalism is doing a great job reinforcing all that toxic information that they're trying to shove down your throats so that you'll spend money, and hopefully your money will end up going towards them being able to profit off of it or build interest or whatever, so that they can continue to build weapons, continue to bully other powers that are not as magnificent enough to fight back, and so on and so forth, right? So we understand that, like our enemies, we too need to continue to reinforce these topics. And we do want to start, by talking about how there is very much a connection between climate change and gender. And I think, based on how we understand the system of patriarchy, and we've talked in several workshops about how it is a system. So we do recommend, I said workshop, apologies, seminar. So I do recommend that you go back and look at some of our previous seminars, but I do want to reiterate, it is in fact a system, which means that, if you are identifying and happen to be born as a male identifying person, then you definitely will benefit greatly from that system. And we could even argue that that's pretty much how patriarchy works, is that it will socially advantage one group of people who are male identifying, giving them not only the ability to yield power, but also the power and the decision making power to decide how that power is then used, right? But, the opposite must be true as well. So if it's socially advantaging one group of people, then it's socially disadvantaging another group of people. And that's pretty much anyone who is not identifying as a male, right? So when we think about climate change, I don't want us to get, too confused about, well, what does the climate have to do with social inequities? Well, it has everything to do with it, because humanity is what determines why the earth is in the conditions that it's in. So, excuse me, if we are to understand that, then we are to understand that, basically with anything else that we think of, we can break it down by the politics, we can break it down by the economics, and we can break it down by the societal structures, or what some scholars might call the structural competency, right? If we were to look at these three aims. And so if we continue to break that down, then we understand that, how we socially perceive people to be deemed as powerful. What is it that makes people powerful? What is it that makes us want to respect them, that makes us want to listen to what they have to say? Why do we assume that when we meet environmental engineers and when we meet people who are doing I am drawing a blank right now on the term, city planners, people like that, why do we assume that their gender is automatically going to be male identifying, right? That's because the propaganda has kind of communicated to us that when we think about people who are in position making roles, they happen to identify as male identifying folks. And so being able to understand, how that power is distributed, being able to understand what some of the greatest scientists have been able to discover, we're still associating this gender connected with it. That means we also need to understand that even how we choose to react to climate change, how we choose to fight, how we choose to resist climate change is still very much driven based off of how power is distributed. And so being able to understand that it could be examples that our comrades mentioned yesterday. I too was on those same webinars that Comrade Ajamu spoke to. And so with the first one, we were able to hear and listen to some amazing panelists who were speaking about some of the issues that they are facing, not necessarily rooted in climate change, but more so rooted in the inequities when it comes to gender, when it comes to patriarchy, when it comes to gender-based violence. Shout out to our comrade who is a member of the Noon organization in Sudan, and how they were speaking to, because of the poorness in terms of how the environment has been treated, because people are coming in, colonizers are coming in, fighting over these resources. They are also not asking for consent. They are abusing people, specifically non-males. The number of abuse has gone up. And the comrade mentioned that they couldn't even give an accurate description of the data because the numbers are inflating every single hour of every single day. So they did the best they could to cite what data they had recently been given access to, but even that number was inflating. And they talked about how, there's been a higher number of sexual assaults. They talked about how there are so many situations where people are starving and dying of starvation, dying of starvation. They mentioned at least 30 people who had committed suicide that were non-male identifying because they didn't want to be in those circumstances and in that situation anymore. And just thinking about that breaks my heart. So I will take a moment to just kind of regroup. But I just need us to understand the purpose of that. Like, what's the purpose of terrorizing a group of people like that in Sudan? Well, it's always based on access to resources. It's based on how much you can get for those resources, which is usually connected to your greed. It's usually connected to how you're trying to see this country as a means to an end for you, and you don't care at to what damage you were doing to that land because you're interested in just getting what you can. I would make the same argument for Palestine. People are so busy worrying about how Israel needs to, understand that, I'm sorry, how Palestinians need to understand that people in Israel, they'll have nowhere to go. And, some people would even make the argument, it's always been about land. The fight has always been about land. And I would argue that is what the root of the issue is. But I think even beyond that, so the same land that you invaded on and told Palestinian people to exit and to leave, you are now bombing the hell out of that land. You are destroying that land. And for what? Because you're not connecting to the fact that you have Ashkenazi roots and you really descend from Europe. That's really what this boils down to. But you're not making those connections, so you're not really able to see that Palestine was never your land to begin with. And at this rate, you don't even want the Palestinians to have a land to stand on because all the soil is toxic. It's full of weapons. It's full of chemicals. It's full of so many things that are not going to be good for the generations to come in terms of them inhaling it and taking it all in. And so, like, we could make this argument about so many other locations, whether it's Haiti, whether it is our comrades who are struggling in the Western Sahara. Like, this argument continues to be on and put. And the bottom line is it makes it really difficult for other folks who are trying to not only figure out ways to identify the social revolutions that they're trying to adjust. So, pieces that come apart where our comrade from the Western Sahara was speaking about how they have divorce parties because there are some areas in the world where you getting a divorce as a non-male person is one of the biggest offenses that you can do. And there are some people who would argue that you should be penalized by death for doing so. So thankfully in Western Sahara, they understand divorce does not mean that somebody needs to die. It just means that this marriage is no longer a functional situation and needs to be terminated, to the point where you're celebrating this person getting their freedom back. I can't even begin to tell you how happy that made me when I heard the comrade say that from the Polisario front, excuse me. And so I'm just happy to hear that these are some of the things that are happening. But these things have been a long time coming, you all, and we need to do more to support them. We need to do more to support the Noon organization out of Sudan. We need to do more to support the Polisario Front out of the Western Sahara. They need us. The people there need us, you all. These people are depending on us to help them. And the best way that we can do that is by understanding how to bring some of that empowerment back to them, how to bring some of that humanity back to them, helping them to understand that they don't have to be penalized just because these are the situations that have come about because they're choosing to resist. They don't have to be ignored. They don't have to be dehumanized because of it. And really, what that means is if we really wanted to understand how to fight and resist climate change, because really we should all be doing it together collectively, by taking responsibility for terminating big corporations and whatnot, taking them down, not supporting them, not buying products that they produce, all of those things. But if we really wanted to do that, then we would need to come together to do that, which means we should also be aware, because here's where the Pan-African piece comes in. We should also be aware that that means that we can't really bring in any system of oppression that is still going to oppress a group of people as we choose to fight to save the planet. That's really what it boils down to, which means we need to kind of make sense and understand how patriarchy really looks like, what it looks like, and how it works. Because if we are still practicing patriarchy, then we're no better than the acid rain that's falling right now, terminating the plants and harming the environment and adding toxicity levels that are even higher than what we were when we were children, right? Like we're no better than that. So we need to kind of acknowledge what that looks like. And we have got to understand that behind all inhumanity examples, you can always count on capitalism, imperialism, Zionism, and greed to be at the back of that, to be at the head of that, to be functioning that, to be pulling it, to be operating it, which means we've got to continue to think about ways to fight and resist it. And this is the last month of the year. This is the last month of the year. For weeks and months now, we've been asking you all to do something to help resist all the oppression that we've talked about. We've asked you to join organizations that were working for justice. We've asked you to support organizations that were working for justice. We've asked you to donate resources, time, energy, ink, paper, whatever, to these organizations that are working for justice. And we've asked you to do a different task in the last 3 months of this year. Well, now we're in December and things are continuing to get worse. They were never going to get better because capitalism is still leading. Imperialism is still leading. Zionism is still leading. Patriarchy is still leading. So we've either got to come to grips with the fact that we are contributing to the problem by not speaking up, by not resisting, by not saying anything, by not increasing our political education, by not joining an organization that is working to resist these same systems that I just spoke to. And if you are not ready to join an organization that is working for justice, as I said, you can volunteer, you can donate, you can give materials that we still need. You can help sponsor the Zoom membership that Comrade Ajamu has to pay every year. You can do something, you all, because we need all the help that we can get. And the fact that you are still tuning in to listen means that your humanity is still clicked in and locked in, which means you know that there's things that you could be doing. So we are asking you. African people are depending on you, and the fate of the world, literally, the climate is depending on you to be able to help us make the change that we need to make. It doesn't matter that you've never been to Africa. It doesn't matter that you don't know the people who are impacted by this climate change trauma that we all have experienced. None of that matters. What matters is that you are a colonized person, you are a queer person, you are a person of color, you are a non-male person, you are a differently abled person, so you have some understanding of what oppression feels like. If you are wise enough to admit that you understand what that feels like, then you understand that it's not a good feeling. And you understand, more importantly, that you have every responsibility to resist it and to fight back against it. You might not be in Haiti right now, but that doesn't mean you're not standing with the Haitian people. You may not be in Palestine right now, but that does not mean you're not standing with the Palestinian people. Every chance you get, you should be speaking out against that. We had a situation yesterday, next slide, please, where as I was wrapping up one of the seminars that we joined, because the other one was us being able to learn about the background and the makeup of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And I'll tell you, it was so humbling because I was able to hear from so many comrades who have been in the party since before I was born, and their perspectives, their stories, being able to hear how they decided to join work study, being able to hear how work study functioned back in the day before we had the internet or PDFs, and being able to scan copies. It's been so humbling to hear of these different parts that have made up this organization that I can now humbly say that I'm trying my best to advance in, and I am organizing with as we speak. But being able to be in both of those spaces, being able to learn the history of both, or the herstory or the theirstory, has been so enlightening. And so after the ceremony, excuse me, after the seminars were over, I was scrolling through social media, as I do, getting ready for tonight's seminar yesterday. And I found that there was a group that had basically interrupted this very colonial meeting. You all have probably seen the clip. I believe they are the Maori people, and it probably took place like somewhere in the Pacific Islands, or maybe even Hawaii somewhere. And so they basically interrupted the meeting and started, using their chant to decolonize and decenter that meeting. And there were more people in the meeting who identified with the Asian, with the indigenous culture, and they joined in with the chant. And so, of course, I was entertained because I like looking at the Europeans to see how they'll respond when things like that take place. And then I always like to go to the comments because I'm curious to see how people will interact and engage with that, right? And, to my surprise, a lot of people were like, yes, this is beautiful, deconstruct, decolonize, all these things. And I'm like, okay, people are talking about colonization. That's good. And then I continued to scroll down, and you see, as a Black woman, this really makes me happy to see. I just wish my people were this organized. And it had like 4.7 thousand likes. And I was like, you're not in an organization that's working for justice. If you were, you wouldn't have said anything like that, because clearly the name Unify is in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We wouldn't say all African if we did not mean to unify every single gosh darn one of us. Clearly, this is why we don't care if you identify as queer. We don't care if you identify as non-male. We don't care if you're left-handed. We don't care if you're right-handed. We don't care if you're differently abled. We don't care if you live on the continent. We don't care if you live in the diaspora. We don't care. We need every single African who wants to live in a better world, because they understand they have a responsibility to do so. The reason the organization name is the All African People's Revolutionary Party is because we need every single person who is willing and able to fight for Mother Africa. And I think if that's not a good example of unity, I don't know which one is. So now I'm trying to figure out how to respond to this person, because there's 3 other people who have said, I agree. And I'm thinking to myself, how dangerous is it for you to just sit back and make accusations that have no truth and no facts whatsoever? So I added the party's website link, and I said, at so and so, trust me, we are unifying. You should check out our website and join us, join this work. And then I said something to the similar effect to the other 2 people, but I was just thinking to myself, that's probably more dangerous than a white supremacist who has nothing to live for and just wants to shoot up as many colonized people as they see. How dare you say something like that when you don't even understand half the work that's being done? If you did, you would not have made that absent-minded comment like you did. So easily, might I add. How nice must it be for you to just spew out rhetorical bullshit that's not even based on reality or truth? That is ridiculous to me. So we need to call that out, you all. We need to call that out. We need to respond to it. We need to hold people accountable and let them know. It's possible that these folks didn't know of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Okay, this is why I provided the websites. But sometimes it's not on social media. Sometimes it's while you're in line at Target checkout. Sometimes it's while you're driving at the stoplight and you might see someone who says something. We have got to continue to speak out, which means we can't, try to be comfortable all the time. That's not going to work. We need to figure out some different ways to push back against that. That's pretty much what this slide is arguing for, is the kind of agency that we're looking for. It's not giving all people the resources and the access that they need, because their agency is not being valued. Their autonomy is not being valued. This is the problem, because they don't hold positions in power. They're not seen as worthy. They're not seen as valuable. They're not seen as important. They're not seen as deserving of respect. That's the bottom line. So we need to figure out a way to change that. And it starts with us kind of addressing any skeletons that we have in our own closet, but even holding other people accountable when we see them displaying disrespectful ways towards marginalized groups. It starts with all of that. I have a committee member who doesn't understand why I'm using non-binary in my dissertation. And I already explained in my introduction, I'm using women, I'm using African descent, all these things. And the person is like, you only have women in your sample size. You don't have non-binary people. So why are you saying non-binary? I'm saying non-binary person because non-binary people are impacted by maternal mortality as well. This is me, you all, resisting. That's what that looks like. This person wants me to take it out of my dissertation. I said, I have all women in my sample size, yes, but clearly maternal mortality doesn't just impact people in my sample, it impacts people everywhere. So I'm still speaking about ways to address the inequities that all people experience when they want to have a baby. And not all of them identify as women. That's what that looks like, you all. We have got to call this shit out, you all. We've got to. If you're not going to be in an organization that's working for justice, the very next thing you can do is call it out. Call it out, call it out, call it out, call it out. And stand firmly when you call it out. Stand true, be courageous, be bold when you call it out. Yes, it's going to be risky the first couple of times, but after a while, people are going to respect you. And you know what they're going to start doing? They're going to start saying African or African descent when they speak to you. They're going to start incorporating it into their culture because you're going to rub off on them, you all, which means you're going to be able to make a change. So this is what that looks like. Socialism means that we're going to have to pull from this Pan-African perspective where we understand what all of this means. Basically, that we all have a responsibility to play. We can't just expect the system to give us things if we're not willing to give back to the people. The people are the ones who are impacted by climate change. Therefore, we as a people need to fight against this, which means we can't be too busy fighting against one another. That's simply not going to do. Otherwise, we're not going to have a climate. We're not going to have a globe to fight for. It's going to be all gone because these corporations have had years and years and years on us. So we need to get our stuff together. We need to organize, and we need to figure out a way to not bring those systems of oppression into this fight that we have to save the planet. If we truly, truly mean that, that means understanding how to address that. If we address the social revolutions, then we can focus on poverty. We can focus on domestic violence. We can focus on education. We can focus on politics, because then all of that stuff will start to come. Thank you.
Obrigada, Madasi. Thank you very much.
Uh-oh, comrade, I think you're muted.
Let us move forward. Madasi, obrigada. Let us move forward and just continue on with this analysis of capitalism, the environment, and gender. And I start with the picture, and hopefully, again, you're able to see the picture. But on the screen, there's a picture of the Emerald Mining Company, which is an Australian mining company that does mining primarily in Ghana, but all over Africa. And in this instance, they are mining in the Nkrofo area of Ghana, which is, Nkrofo is a small town where Kwame Nkrumah was born, that I've had the privilege of visiting multiple times. But this company is drilling here, and I've been to this spot. I've been where the picture is. And so where you see them working to drudge up the gold there, they're mining for gold. There's a river right beyond where you see the trees. That's a river there. And there are families that rely on that river to wash, to have drinking water, to have water to clean. I mean, they use that water in the river right there, just not even 200 feet from where this mining work is happening there. And so this is, an example of what we're talking about in that the mining that these people are doing, this Emerald Company and these, these other European capitalist companies are doing in Africa, they have no there's no concern for the impact of their mining work on the land. Their mining work leaves the lands basically, when they're done, uninhabitable, barren and unusable for decades. It takes decades for the lands to regroup if they have the right ecological conditions to be able to do so. And obviously, if that's the case with the lands, you can just imagine the type of ecological impact what they're doing has on the people. And of course, this gold mining, it's not mining for gold to benefit the African masses. They don't see any benefit at all from this mining work. This is created for the jewelry companies who create this jewelry that so many of you all can't wait to put on your bodies as some kind of sign of capitalist prestige. That's where all this goes. None of this is usable and beneficial to the people of Africa. That's why this is the reason why Africa is as poor as it is, and why the European capitalist world is as rich as it is. This is the sole reason for this, because of this process I'm describing to you right now. And of course, we know, we say it all the time, and it's irrefutable. Capitalism is a system that's based upon exploitation. It got its start because of exploitation. It was built upon the transatlantic slave trade. It would not be here today were it not for the transatlantic slave trade and the seed money the transatlantic slave trade provided to fuel the industrialization period, which created the capitalist system, which has been the dominant economic system for the last couple of hundred years. That system is now in a state of decline, but it's still the dominant economic system today all over the planet Earth. And its primary reason for existing, again, is to exploit the world's human and material resources. Now, Africa, of course, has more natural resources than all the other land bases on Earth combined. That's an objective fact. So, of course, the center of that exploitation and the process to build from that exploitation is going to be based on exploiting Africa. So, if you understand that, and I know people hear it like, I understand it, but I don't think most people really understand it, truly. Because if we really understood that, it wouldn't be so difficult for us to understand these other concepts, right? Like the fact that the reason why African people are so exploited and oppressed in Canada, in the United States, in Central South America, in the Caribbean, all over Africa, is because of this process I'm describing to you. Um, Everybody makes a contribution to the world, but the capitalist system was not fueled by exploiting Asia. It was not fueled by exploiting Europe. It was not fueled by exploiting the Americas. It was fueled primarily from the exploitation of Africa. That's not saying that because we're more oppressed than anybody else. We don't play those kind of stupid games. The statement is simply an objective historical fact, and it explains why African people are on the bottom of every society we exist on the planet Earth. And it also explains why anti-African white supremacy is imbued in every culture, not just European culture, but every culture, including African culture. It's imbued in that. And it's a part of the existing circumstances that govern all over the world. And that's the reason for that. Because for the African masses to stand up would mean an end to the capitalist system, since the system is based upon exploiting what belongs to us. So, of course, they have to have a special mechanism to keep us oppressed. So, capitalism's role is to perform that function for the multinational corporate entities that dominate the world. And whether we're talking about oil refining in the Niger Delta, diamond mining in Zimbabwe or Azania or what you call South Africa or Mozambique or Zambia, whether we're talking of any of these exploitative practices, all of it is done for the reasons I'm talking to you about, to ensure that the wealth of the capitalist world continues, and at the same time, keeping the masses of African people poor, suffering, and disorganized. The Zionist state of Israel could not be the entity it is today without the exploitation of Africa's diamonds. African diamonds represent about 35% of Israel's national gross domestic product. They produce almost 40% of the polished diamonds on the world market. So those of you that you get married in these capitalist countries, oh, I gotta buy a diamond ring. Those are African diamonds that contain the sweat and blood of our people, processed through the racist Zionist state of Israel. And that's how this international system of imperialism works. And so another example is, we talked about the gold mining. Another example is the cocoa processing. I'm reading a book on that now. 75% of the chocolate products consumed in the United States of America come from the cocoa industry in Ghana, the production of cocoa in Ghana. And this is an extremely exploitative industry. So this system of colonialism and slavery that was set up hundreds of years ago set in place these processes that continue to this day to exploit these resources, whether it's cocoa, whether it's oil, diamonds, gold, cobalt, bauxite, phosphates. All of these are extremely exploitative processes. And the relationship to the topic for today is that the multinationals who are mining those resources are not doing it in a way that's respectful towards the continued health and prosperity of the African continent. They're getting whatever they can for as cheap as they can, as quick as they can, and without a single concern for the environment and the impact of what they're doing on the people who live in Africa. And they have the financial resources to ensure that there's no legislative oversight to prevent them from being able to continue to engage in their exploitative processes. And we can show you how that's the reality in all of those industries that we just got through talking about. So this is the reason why these health disparities exist on the African continent. This is the reason for this. And this is the reason why it prohibits us from being able to move forward. And this is, why we struggle to achieve what we're struggling to achieve. So, for example, data on climate change in women or global warming, right? Women and families in Africa have been impacted by waste, by war efforts, right? As example, which have adversely impacted the environment, right? There are credible and reliable reports through, even organizations like the United Nations and the African Union. They have this information. We've looked at it. You can look at it too, where women, for example, in the Congo or in Libya or in many other places, Liberia, where there have been long and sustained wars, in Eritrea, Ethiopia, long sustained wars. Like the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea was 30 years, and then it stopped, and then there have been skirmishes after that fact. So that's a long time. And the war to devastate the Libyan Jamahiriya produced massive armaments there in 2011 under Barack Obama's regime. To do that, massive armaments were released there. And the Congo has been basically a territory where war has happened for the last 70 years, nonstop. And so what we're finding in this research and report is that women in those areas who are pregnant, they're finding rocket fuel in their breast milk. And this is the same in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. Anytime there's this type of massive armaments that are being displayed, this has been a consistent find from the scientific community. And this is, so important because it's not like any of these wars I just mentioned were fought to advance. They weren't really fought. I mean, of course, the the war, the struggle for Eritrea, that was a legitimate struggle to gain their independence and to be seen as a separate nation, just like the war with the Western Sahara and Polisario against Morocco is a legitimate struggle that we support 100%. But most of these instances, certainly the destruction of the Libyan Jamahiriya and neo-colonialism and imperialism in the Congo and Liberia and Sierra Leone and all these places, all of these things served no purpose to advance the African masses, but they did serve to advance the gold and diamond industries, to advance the cobalt, Apple and Samsung and all of these crooks and goddamn criminals in the Congo, certainly Chevron oil in Libya, all of these military terrorism against the African masses certainly benefited those crooks and terrorists, but did nothing to advance the people in Africa and left waste that is poisoning our people, poisoning the earth and our people in Africa. And imperialism's destruction of the great man-made lake that the Libyan Jamahiriya created. It was destroyed by North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO bombing the hell out of that region in 2011 to undermine and destroy the Libyan Jamahiriya. And here you had that bastard Barack Obama today. I'm sorry, I should, to hell with you. I hope you drop dead from a heart attack. You killed millions of people for no reason whatsoever. And we're supposed to listen to we don't give a damn about your apology. You're nothing but a poot butt for international imperialism. I don't give a damn what you look like. I'm not that shallow like so many of our people. I'm not so shallow like that. It's about what kind of contribution are you making towards the advancement of the planet or against the interests of the masses of the people of the planet. And that NATO bombing throughout 2011 created nothing but absolute ecological terrorism throughout that entire Sahara Desert region where the great man-made lakes existed in Libya and the surrounding territories. And the results of disease that will come as a result of that, we won't even know the impact of that for years to come. But we already know that certainly the potable water has been completely wiped out. That was created by this project by Libya. And that, when you don't have potable water, that's an instant invitation to all sorts of diseases. And this is a climatic problem for the people in Central and North Africa. So these are the types of things that we're talking about when we talk about the climate and preserving the continent of Africa and all the lands across the earth, and how these multinational capitalist corporations have no concern about that. You know, even if you talk about like the protests at Standing Rock a few years ago in North Dakota, the efforts to stop the oil pipeline by the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere coming together to do that. And reading up on that, you know, we read up a great deal on that in our cadre circle in the APRP during that time. And we had people who went to Standing Rock in solidarity with the indigenous struggle. And I know from our studies during that time that these oil pipelines were built hundreds of feet under the water. And they were built with materials that no scientific expert could successfully and truthfully argue could withstand the climatic conditions and not burst, which would cause monumental devastation to the ecological balance in those areas. And this is why the indigenous people protested the construction of these thousands of miles of, or hundreds of miles of oil pipeline under the water, under the land. Well, it's the same reality in Africa in terms of what's going on there to build oil pipelines, to mine for gold and diamonds, for cobalt, and all of these things. No concern for the ecological impact that it has on the people in Africa. And I that trail I walked in Nkrofo in Ghana where the people were in the water, where the waste from the Australian mining company is, being emptied into the water where the people were every day. I mean, at some point, 10 years from now, there'll be a study there and it'll show all of the death and destruction that results from that. And so this is why we are the way we are and why we want to run these people the hell out of Africa, because this is the main mechanisms that are preventing us from solving the problems that our people face. And here today, these people want to say that the reason why we're the poorest is because we're lazy. And I mean, I know a lot of us are scared. We walk through the world scared, and we feel like we can't really question anything. I mean, go to hell with that. If somebody talks like that in front of me, I'm gonna do my best to slap the what out of them, talking about we're lazy. And I know that these conditions exist that are impacting. And of course, as always, with everything, the overwhelmingly negative impact of all of this is always impacting African women and marginalized gender people. Always are the most adversely impacted by all of these manifestations, right? So, just to talk about what is the truth, the undeniable truth, right? What is the truth? What is it? And so, I think I refer back to the program we had last weekend. We had a program on neo-colonialism in Africa, and we had participants from liberation movements all over Africa. And one of them we mentioned is the Polisario Front. And if you don't know about that, it's a struggle of people in North Africa who, right now, Morocco claims the Western Sahara, and these people are like, we're part of the Western Sahara. We're not a part of Morocco. Morocco is a neo-colonialist regime. Morocco is a stool pigeon for international imperialism. We don't want to be a part of that. And this is the position of the Polisario Front, that we want socialism. We see socialism. We see the unification of Africa as critical to our ability to function with peace and justice there in the Western Sahara. So they are, of course, a group that we are working actively to form that level of unity with. And so they participated in a program we had a week ago, as well as one we had yesterday, and many others to come. And the comrade sister from the Western Sahara, she told us, she apologized for her English. And we told her, you have no, I mean, we had dozens of people on the call, but we told her, you have nothing to apologize to us for whatsoever. Your English is perfect. With several questions were asked of her, and she had, if she asked, if the questions were asked of many of you, you would have slipped and slid and fumbled over your words and farted and had, done everything you could to avoid having to answer in any way where there could even potentially be some consequences for you because you're so full of shit. Whereas this comrade sister, she, despite whatever challenges she sees herself having with English, she answered those questions as quickly, concisely, and correctly as they could possibly be answered. And someone asked her, like, for example, a couple of questions I remember. She was asked, what do the surrounding Muslim countries, what are they doing for the Western Sahara? She said nothing. That was it. And that's clear, right to the point. Nothing, not a damn thing. They're not doing anything for us. And then the other question came up, like, what kind of help can we expect as African people to liberate Africa? And she said, nowhere. No one's going to do that except ourselves. There was nothing wrong with her English. It was perfectly clear. Most of you couldn't answer that clearly because you'd be like, well, we could go, we could pray over it, we could do all this nonsense where the communication gets completely lost. So that's why it's never about how well, quote unquote, you can speak a language. There really is no such thing as that. The purpose of communication is when you articulate something, do the people that you're talking to understand what you're telling them, period. If they do, it's effective communication. If they don't, it's not. I don't care if you're trained in the best schools of English in Britain. If I don't understand what the hell you're saying, you're not an effective communicator in English. So this is something that, there's a class analysis to it. And because African people are disrespected, for example, because indigenous people are disrespected, for example, when people speak Spanish, it's considered inferior. When people speak what's called Ebonics or Africanized English, it's considered inferior. But the reality, the truth is if I say I'm going to the store, or I say I'm finna go to the store, if you understand that I'm going to the store, what the hell difference does it make? Now, I understand, like, to get a slave here and do this slavery thing in this backward ass country, you got to play these certain games, but don't confuse that with truth and justice. I did not raise my daughter. I made every effort to make sure she was clear about that. Look, this is our culture. This is who we are. Be proud of your culture. But when you're dealing with these Neanderthal people in this society, you have to be able to speak this way because this is a backward ass system that's built on our backs. It's really just that simple. So the reason why that's important is because we have to understand communication and stop giving into this backward class analysis that is designed to perpetuate this white supremacist perspective of who we are as a people. So all of this is true, as it relates to 1 billion African women in the world and marginalized gender folks. This is true that capitalism sees all of them simply as being in the way of capitalism pursuing its never-ending quest for profits and world domination. And because of that, this is the reason why African women are always on the front lines. And we had a program where we talked about this. Shakur talked about, we had a meeting yesterday where we gave those of us who are senior cadre in the All African People's Revolutionary Party the space to talk about the history of the party for newer people like Shakura and Newer. And we had breakout sessions, and one of them was to talk about the history of the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. And I chose to go to that one because, one, I knew most people were not going to choose to do that, especially most men were not going to choose to do that, which is a struggle that we have to continue to wage. We're certainly going to wage it, but also because, as I said in the breakout session, and as we articulated in the main section when we came back, I feel like the All African Women Revolutionary Women's Union has been the foremost entity that has brought humanity to the party in our work, that has really translated the principles of the party into practical activity. And I see that as having had a major impact on my life in terms of how I try to walk through this world every day, largely because of the AWRU. So this is because African women are at the forefront of this struggle for justice. And a lot of us here in the United States get it confused, like, because Kamala Harris didn't win, it's like, well, African women shouldn't be relied on to save the world. No, it's not about saving the world. It's about understanding that African women have historically been the most serious about engaging in the struggle for justice. And because of that, the capitalist system sees them as the primary enemy that stands in the way of them being able to maintain their interests. And so they will always engage in these types of exploitative activities that are designed to undermine and completely disengage African women, marginalized gender folks from being able to achieve their full potential. And as men, and all peace and justice loving people that aren't African, all of us have a responsibility to recognize this and to get your ass out of the way of African women and to get it in the way of helping build up revolutionary African women capacity. And if you're not doing that, all you're doing is wasting time. So we thank you for joining us today, and we invite you to come back next week, because December 4th represents the annual unfortunate commemoration of the police state assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, Black Panther Party leaders in the state of Illinois here in the United Snakes of America. So next week, we're going to talk about not just the fact that Fred and Mark were murdered. Most of you know that, but we're going to talk about why the police murdered them the way they did, their strategic process for how they wanted the community to view the murders, and how they've used that in several instances, whether you talk about how they murdered Patrice Lumumba and Maurice Mpolo and Thomas Sakoto in the Congo, how they murdered Ernesto Che Guevara in Bolivia. There's a certain methodology to how they murder revolutionaries and why they murder them the way they do. And so that's what we're going to be talking about next week. So we certainly invite you to join us. We invite you to click on the QR code in the upper left-hand corner where you can find out about other APRP programs beyond Our Ancestors' Voices, which you should do because we have a number of them. You can also go to our Forward Ever shop. If you're going to be spending your money for the imperialist holiday this month, then you should buy revolutionary African message clothing, hoodies, t-shirts, etc., so that you can support revolutionary African organization. I'm sick of this support Black businesses. They don't do a damn thing to support our people. Support revolutionary African. There's no question of the work that we're doing to advance our people. So help us do it. Support. Go to the Forward Ever shop and do that. In that QR code, you can find out how to do that. Go to hoodcommunist.org, Revolutionary Pan-African blog, read about that and the articles on there every week. Every Thursday, there are new articles on there. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party at AAPRP-intl.org. You can also donate. You can go to Venmo at A-APRP or PayPal at AAPRP. So you can do that and contribute. And then you can become a regular sponsor of Burkina Books, a program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party militants on the ground in Burkina Faso in the Sahel region of West Africa. So we certainly encourage you to do that. We encourage you to buy my book. It's been selling copies through the month of November. I hope that continues. We have a lot of anti-fascist work that we're coming up on, and I use the money from that to pay for travel, to pay for materials, all of that in that anti-fascist work. So my book is a guide. I know some of you don't have screens, but my book is a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence, a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. A lot of people are asking me, so I continue to answer this. You can only get it on Amazon. And for any of you that are against Amazon, I certainly don't need you to give me a speech about it. I was battling corporations like Amazon when you were probably sucking on bottles. So I don't need you to tell me a damn thing about that. This is a tactical approach because I've dealt with 4 different publishers. This is not the first book that I've written and published. And if you write and publish books, it's not a question of whether you're going to deal with a criminal, it's just which one you're going to deal with, because the publishing industry is a criminal enterprise. And so of all the publishers, the 4 publishers I've dealt with, truthfully, Amazon's been the best one. They print the books, they ship them as they're supposed to, and they pay royalties. I still have a couple of publishers I had never received a dime, even though I know the book sold. So I don't need you. I understand what Amazon is better than you do. But we are trying to get the word in people's minds. And if you don't have a better way for us to do that, then shut the hell up, buy the goddamn book, and organize for justice and liberation. Thank you for joining us today. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your evening.